Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about language and consciousness. Our guest is Dan Alford, founder and editor of the newsletter of Transpersonal Linguistics. Mr. Alford studied linguistics at UCLA and UC Berkeley. He spent 4 years at the Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation in Montana, where he helped develop a writing system and dictionary for that language, and he teaches at the California Institute of Integral Studies. What's the relationship between language and consciousness?
Well, that's an interesting one. Something that I talk about a lot in my classes is the concept that thought matters, that everything begins in thought and filters down through various mechanisms that we have available here into reality. And language is one very important vehicle by which thought can become reality.
Thought matters. Some people would suggest that thoughts don't matter, only actions matter.
Exactly. One of the things that I've gotten very interested in my linguistic studies has to do with the origins of language. Now, most of these things are in legends, but as someone once said, a legend is the highest scientific statement when it's the only statement available. And that's what we have in a lot of cultures all over the world. And all of them suggest, first off, that there was something akin to telepathy that existed before human language, and it was what people spoke to spirits and animals, for instance, in. And then something happened, and after that we had to talk to each other in human speech. Now that's where the usual Tower of Babel legend stops. But for instance, an American Indian legend that I got from in Cheyenne continues on and says, but we retained the old language for dreams and for communicating with spirits and animals. And this kind of lays out a states of consciousness view of language that allows things that, say, normal linguistics might not allow, that deals with consciousness issues that in fact says those are the most important ones to tackle, because everything flows from that.
Oftentimes people experience, well, I experience it often, that you think something, and even in a conversational setting, you think something, but when you say it, it comes out very different from what you thought.
Yeah, and that has to do with the impression of consciousness onto the time-space continuum that you're in at the moment. And as you're thinking something, conditions are a certain way. And even a few words later, you'll be entering into something else that perhaps in a way that you don't even know is going to fit into the listener better than you could have anticipated.
In the Tower of Babel story that you just told, in terms of the origins of spoken language, that suggests that it's kind of a punishment, that before that we were in a more perfect state than we got to when we had to start using language to communicate.
Well, one never knows. There's always trade-offs. For instance, human beings gain a certain preciseness by having these tokens that we can refer to. It speeds up communications. It makes it more accurate in certain ways. But, for instance, again, the old language isn't lost, and we are using it all the time. Let's look at emotions. You can say things, in fact, sometimes it doesn't matter what words come out of your mouth. The emotional tone is the one that somebody's going to get, and they're going to react to, no matter what your words were. And so that power of language is still present with us.
Mm-hmm. We made reference in the introduction to the time that you spent with the Cheyenne Indians on the Cheyenne Reservation.
Yes.
How is their language different from English?
Well, one of the most basic differences is that whereas English is very noun-oriented, talking about this, and this, and naming everything under the sun as a noun, the Cheyenne language and most American Indian languages are verb-oriented. So it's talking about states of things and how they change and how they grow, and going from a noun-centered language to a verb-centered language, it sometimes feels like you've left the earth altogether. if the noun-centered language is the one that you were used to. Now, one of the interesting things about Cheyenne itself is that it has a lot of voiceless vowels, whispered vowels, that come in various places in the word. And, for instance, it took me about a full year to get the wax out of my ears to be able to hear these things. A word like my spine is tataton. I'll do it again. Tataton. It's got 3 whispered vowels and then 1 long voiced vowel. And it just takes a long time. Now, having to develop a writing system, I had to figure out in each case what's the whispered vowel that I can't hear. Now, it was made easier by the fact that there were only 3 vowels to pick from, a, and o. And if it was an very often instead of just being a straight it would have an S after it. So you could tell that one. So then usually it was between A and O, and you had to develop certain tricks to take the ending off of it, put another ending on that did something else, and see if the vowel was uncovered, and just fascinating tricks like that. So in the sounds, in the way the words are put together, in the worldview, in the way they comprehend what they're looking at and put it into words to report to someone else. You and a Cheyenne could be standing next to each other on a street corner, see a car accident, and even more than the normal variability between 2 English speakers, the reports that came out of those could be just, different things noticed because the Cheyenne language assists you in noticing certain things and not noticing others. It could be just totally at variance as to what was important to each person reporting something.
Would we assume that the English language is directly related to the frequent criticism that we are a very materialistic society, that we have noun names for everything? We're very caught up in things as opposed to states of being?
The language certainly assists in that. We are part of the larger grouping of what's called Proto-Indo-European languages, all of which have this heavy emphasis on nouns, all of which we can see in the cultural view of things have this same sort of materialistic culture as well.
You said that people with different languages would see different things in reality and would describe a car accident different ways. Does that suggest that since the words in language are symbols and not reality, apple is a word, but it's not an apple? It's a word that describes apple. It's a symbol for that. Does that mean that there is always imperfect communication in the use of language?
I think there has to be. Again, where there isn't, where the communication becomes more perfect is, I think, when you're going into emotional things. And you can tell, even if a person is speaking a totally different language from you, very often you can tell the emotional tenor that's coming through, and that hits you in a way that there's just no conventional explanation for it. In fact, one of the things I teach in my class has to do with syntax, which is they're kind of emotional stretching and healing exercises developed by Manfred Kleins of Australia. And one of the things we find out there is that the emotions shared across the board with human beings are more precise than the words for those emotions in any of the languages. The words may not correlate, but the language, the emotions themselves are extremely precise and can be charted in various ways. And so you get toward more perfection that way, I think. Of course, that isn't going to help on giving somebody directions on how to get around the corner.
How might it help? Can you give us an example of an exercise that you might use?
Well, the kinds of exercises we use here have to do with saying a word once. Let's say it's a word like hate or bliss or reverence, and you keep going with it, maybe repeating it in your mind about 20, 30 different times. What you find is that with each one of these, there are experiences that you've lived through that are welling up within you, and you see a changing panorama. Pretty soon you figure out that when you're on one emotional tack, it's very hard to think of something in another emotional tone. If you get depressed easily, for instance, one of the things you start seeing is more and more depressing thoughts coming into your head, and it's very hard to hold on to a happy thought when you're in the emotional tone of depression. And so one of the things we do is teach our students that. And the other is, let's say, an emotion like reverence. There's very little... in general, there's very little, few ways for people to experience that emotion in this civilization, and yet they all have some intimations of it, and so it kind of stretches their own appreciation of a feeling like reverence in a modern secular society.
Let's follow one of those exercises through and see if we can't do it on the radio today.
Okay, I would ask everyone listening, unless you're in an automobile, of course, close your eyes, relax, and just let your mind drain for just a few seconds here. And as I say a word, I want you to just say it to yourself, and then every time I snap my fingers, release that emotion that you had and start all over again with it. And watch what comes up next. Let's take something like bliss. Bliss is a nice word. Okay, so starting now, bliss. Now, in a normal exercise, this would be going on for a good 5 minutes, just letting each one well up, releasing it, and starting it all over again. In the whole stretch, we would start with maybe a few negative emotions in order to kind of get them out of the way and orchestrate emotion by emotion into a nice resolution at the end. And then there's kind of a burn-in time where you allow all of them to come together in kind of a chord that you hear and you feel all of them at the same time. And it's an unusual exercise, but the students report back that it's a very exhilarating sort of thing to go through.
Okay, I come to you, I'm a student, I say, wait a minute, I thought I was going to learn something about linguistics, and you've got me on this emotional track where I'm getting all kinds of images of soft clouds and flowers and everything else going through my mind. Let's get back to your original statement about thoughts are real, our thoughts are important.
Okay. One of the most important things that I teach is how language creates reality. That you can actually do things. You can have things come out of your mouth. In fact, every time something comes out of your mouth, you're having an impact on the environment around you. Let me give you a good example. In fact, I'm going to be working this into a public service announcement. I have a cable TV show down in Hayward, Reality, Mind, and Language. It's been going for 3 years. I'll use their setup to do it. It has to do with seat belts and wearing seat belts. And there was a portion of me that for a long time, and I don't know what portion it was or where to point, but something was resisting putting on seat belts. And it was just too much bother. I don't know what was going on. And I finally decided to use my own techniques that I teach to help create a different reality for myself. And I wanted a phrase that I had to carefully craft that would not compromise me by saying it. I don't want to say lies out of my mouth, but I want to say something that would gently nudge my subconscious, the part that was resisting. And so I finally came up with the phrase. As soon as I sit down in my car, I say out loud, and out loud is important because of the effect that it's going to have in the environment, I like wearing seat belts. Now, that doesn't say that I like to wear them myself, necessarily, because there's still some portion that's resisting. but it says I like the concept of wearing seatbelts. In fact, it's just kind of ambiguous. It just, I like wearing seatbelts. The guy that I bring to work with me gets in the car. I turn to him and I say, I like wearing seatbelts. Well, what's he going to do? You know, he sees me strapped in now, and I haven't told him to put on his seatbelt, but he reaches back and he puts on his seatbelt. And I found by doing this with a number of people that every time I encourage someone else to in that way, it more reinforces what I was after for myself. And so it becomes a teach-learning situation for everyone involved, and there's no compulsion, it's just a gentle way of training your subconscious. And that's the sort of thing I love to do and teach people the power of.
Talking about seatbelts and language real quickly, the one that sticks with me, and I don't know how many years ago I heard it, but it was some clever little campaign, and it was a negative reinforcement instead of a positive one. The statement was, seatbelts wrinkle your clothing, windshields wrinkle your face. Better wrinkled clothing than a wrinkled face.
Well, that's very
and
good.
It's kind of clever, and it
Yeah.
stuck with me. I don't repeat it out loud, however. Maybe I'll try it the next time somebody resists wearing a seatbelt. Can we be manipulated by language? Is that an example of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, all words hypnotize to some extent. That's their function. There is no difference, and we go into this very much in my class, there's no difference between hypnosis and the state that I can put people into when I'm just telling them a good story. In fact, there was some work done in Philadelphia by Dr. Condon that had to do with two people hooked up to EEG machines, getting brainwave scans, and at the moment that these two people move toward each other and get into a conversation, all of a sudden the brainwave patterns start becoming much more similar than they were before. If one is pulled out of the conversation, the brainwave patterns start becoming more individual again. Well, I was fascinated when I read that because it has to do with this ineffable link that we establish, the link of rapport between people. Now, the only other time I'd seen any results like this coming out of an experiment had to do with some Russian telepathy experiments, that two Russians were 500 miles apart, hooked up to EEG. As soon as it was time for them to make the link and begin telepathic communication, it was noted that their brainwave patterns became very similar. In fact, they became similar about 4 seconds before the two guys were sure that they were linked up. And after the link was broken, again resuming individual stances. Well, what we've got here are three ideas that are inextricably linked. There's language, there's hypnosis, there's telepathy, and all of them depend on this link of rapport that goes between two people. And once that's there, anything can happen, because the words that are coming to you, let's say in hypnosis, simple words that would be given to you, such as your arm is cataleptic. If you are in a state of rapport with the person saying this, your arm is going to become very stiff. And that is, for instance, what advertising people are always counting on, that they do something to bring this link into you, and the moment it's there, they know that they can get to the parts of your subconscious that would not be accessible unless some link like that had happened.
What's the difference between the spoken word and language in that sense and the written word? If you and I are talking about something, the suggestion here is that our brain waves will become more in sync as we establish rapport. What about if we both take a sheet of paper that has the same words written on it? Does a similar thing happen?
Generally, I would think there would be more of a rapport with the consciousness that wrote the piece of paper that you're reading. That's one of my friends, an American Indian, called literacy left brain telepathy. That it's a it's a hybrid telepathy that works through the eyes instead of through vocal or subvocal manipulations. That it's, in other words, that link is there as well, but it's not necessarily going to link to people who are reading the same thing, unless one of them was the author. This is getting into rather speculative areas, I would say.
How can you better prepare yourself to understand language, the language that you speak and other languages? Is there an exercise or something that you can do? I'm thinking, again, a personal example. Sometimes I'll be in a situation where people speak another language. I was lost in Yugoslavia. I knew what was going on. I was able to understand from the people around me what their emotions were, not the specific words or the grammar or any of the specific context, but I got meaning out of it, and I was able to function. Other times I've been in a restaurant situation where you're next to a table of people that are speaking about something. You don't have a clue. All you hear are sounds coming out, but there's nothing. Is there a way to...
In the former case, in Yugoslavia, for instance, you were creating these links with people. And furthermore, there was something that you wanted out of it, which is a whole different situation than some people next to you talking in a language, and you're just coming in the middle of it. You have no idea what's going on. You haven't established any links with these people. Generally, language learning, I believe, especially for children, is best done in an immersion sort of situation where you go to Yugoslavia, you get lost in the crowd, you start picking up on the emotions, on the hand gestures, on little things to begin with, and just let go. That's the main thing, of letting go. You've got to let go of how you know the world in the English language, and to the extent that you can let go of that, the other language can seep in.
What about the problems of communication, again, within the language? We get calls, excuse me, here at KCBS all the time from people who swear they heard things that we know for a fact that they didn't hear. And they turn the facts around. If you said something was black, they will call in and say, you said that such and such was white, and it diametrically opposed to what is the reality. And they were listening, they can put it in context, they know what came before, what came after, but they just don't hear it while they're hearing it.
Well, it's very difficult for anyone in linguistics to really account for the perversities of human nature.
All right, moving right along. Mantras. What is a mantra, and what is its role? And does it have some kind of foundation in linguistics?
Okay. An interesting number of questions there. Mantras are not part of this culture. Okay, they're imported. The Indo-European languages, since they branched off from the Indo part and got into the European part, also left behind all kinds of things that the Sanskrit people knew about consciousness. For instance, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there were, in ancient Sanskrit, there were over 200 terms for states of consciousness. We have like awake and asleep and a whole raft of things having to do with being drunk, or intoxicated in various ways, but that's the extent of what we have. Okay, mantras were very important to these people. Now, on the simplest level, you can talk about a mantram as simply something that primitive superstitious people do, and it has no effect at all. Others have talked about it. For instance, Benjamin Whorf, a little-known linguist earlier this century who delved into these consciousness issues, talked about how in a very high civilization that's been working with these concepts for a long time, a mantram actually becomes the vehicle to assist your mind into the higher consciousness, so that things that were only at very low levels, perhaps even unobservable in your normal waking life, let's say something like telepathy, assisted by the mantram, can be multiplied 100-fold, 1,000-fold, and become very strong. And so it's one of the most powerful consciousness tools that there is, using language, using the sounds of language very often. It can be otherwise a nonsense stringing together of syllables, but if it means something to you and your consciousness, it can take you to places that are totally inaccessible normally.
Is that because a mantra is not a symbol for anything?
Right. The way I see it, a mantra just is, and is working on the level of what sounds themselves do when they affect the human nervous system. And they may have a totally different meaning on that purely phonetic sound level than they would have in any known human language.
How many known human languages are there?
Well, I'm not sure of what we're working with now. It may be between 2,000 and 3,000. Usually we break it down into language families. Of those, I'm not even sure of all of these things. Maybe 16 language families around the world, maybe more. This isn't the area that I usually talk about. But each one becomes a unique point of view on the world, a unique way of seeing everything that happens and making sense of it, and making sense in a way that you will report it to someone else. We don't just remember things. We often remember them in a way that we're going to tell someone, and that's where that vital link between consciousness, experience, and language comes about.
Given the fact that there are a number of languages operating on the planet, or that have operated that are no longer operating because of a lack of participants, is it likely that we will ever have one language?
If we do, it's going to be one that is of a cultural importance. English is heading toward that, and it's a way of keeping track of the outside world. But there's never going to be a single language to the exclusion of others, because people's emotional lives are much more important to them than talking about the realities of the outside world.
Is it possible that we would get beyond language, back to where you suggested we started?
Back to before Babel. Who can tell what's going to happen in the next 50 years? There are a number of prophecies from the ancient Mayans, from Nostradamus, from a number of different sources that tend to suggest that around the year 2012 that we're going to see some important major global changes happening, that it's at that point that the ancient Mayans, for instance, predicted that we would be entering what they called the age of consciousness. And in that case, I would think we will see something returning to a pre-Babel state. After all, this whole thing with human speech may be simply an experiment that's being tried on a mass level on the planet Earth.
This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.